Hi, everyone, and welcome to our Art in Focus lecture series presented in conjunction with Stony Brook Southampton Libraries. And thanks to Claire Payne, who is the Web Services Director and Data Librarian and Liaison to the Art Department, who is the host, who unfortunately could not be with us at the moment, but has really shepherded this whole program for us. This is presented in conjunction with the exhibition at the Southampton Arts Center, Techspressionism, Digital and Beyond, which has now been extended through July 23rd. The show has created such a positive impression that they decided to keep it on. And we're delighted to welcome the curator of that exhibition for today's talk, and that is Colin Goldberg. Colin coined the term Techspressionism in 2011 to describe an artistic approach in which technology is utilized as a means to express emotional experience. Since then, it's evolved into an international movement with periodic online meetups modeled on the 19th century salon concept, in which artists share their works and personal creative philosophies. Colin will discuss Techspressionism's genesis, survey its present flowering, and imagine its potential. So I'm going to ask everyone to stay muted during Colin's talk and then hold your questions till the end, or put your questions into the chat and we can address them when he's finished. And in the chat, I also put a link to the Southampton Art Center's Techspressionism exhibition. Just to give you a little background on Colin, he was born in the Bronx, New York, to parents of Japanese and Jewish ancestry, both of whom were Ph.D. chemists. His grandmother, Kimiye, was an accomplished practitioner and instructor of Japanese Shodo calligraphy. He has been a freelancer in New York City advertising agencies, coding and designing some of the web's first consumer-facing sites, and launching brands such as Snapple, Golf Magazine, and Popular Science Online. He holds a BA in studio art from Binghamton University and an MFA in computer art from Bowling Green State University, and is a recipient of grants from the Pollock-Krasner Foundation and the New York Council on the Arts. So now I'm going to turn the program over to Colin.
Thank you, Helen. And thanks everyone for joining us today. First off, I'd like to thank the Pollock-Krasner House and Study Center, as well as Stony Brook University Library and Southampton Arts Center for sponsoring this Art in Focus lecture series. And I'd also like to thank Helen for inviting me to speak. So let me share my screen here. So my name is Colin Goldberg, and I'm an artist and curator of the exhibition Techspressionism, Digital and Beyond, currently on view at Southampton Arts Center through July 23rd, 2022. I just wanted to make sure, Helen, can you see my screen okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. So Techspressionism is defined as an artistic approach in which technology is utilized as a means to express emotional experience. The term is derived from the root words technology and expressionism. I'm going to save the best for first and open with a drone fly-through of the exhibition captured by my friend Joanna Steidel of Hampton's Drone Images. In this presentation, I'm going to provide some background on Techspressionism's origins, its growth through the pandemic, and where it's heading in the future. In order to provide some context, I'm going to open with a brief look at my personal artistic background and studio practice. I've always loved to draw since I was a kid, and I got my start with computer art in the 1980s with the Commodore 64, our family's first home computer. I created my first digital drawings using a variety of input tools, including the light pen and the koala pad, which was an early drawing tablet. I was also involved in the BBS scene, which stands for bulletin board systems. It was mostly kids trading games using dial-up connections into each other's homes. These kids organized into groups, much like graffiti crews, and cracked and traded video games across the Atlantic. The crews also created elaborate intro screens for the cracked games. This was known as the demo scene. I now see these underground demo scene graphics as early cultural precursors to the NFT community of today, in which artists and collectors often function anonymously under a pseudonym or handle. This painting, entitled Sky People, was my first publicly exhibited work. The piece reflects my early interest in surrealism and was shown at the East End Student Show at Southampton's Parish Art Museum in 1989 when I was a senior at Southampton High School. Interestingly, this is the same gallery space in which Techspressionism Digital and Beyond is currently installed, now occupied by Southampton Arts Center. The Parish Art Museum has since moved to its current location in Watermill. After graduating from Southampton High School in 1990, I went on to study studio art with a painting concentration at Binghamton University in upstate New York. The summer after my junior year, I did an internship working as a studio assistant for an artist named Steve Miller, who had already been working with technology art for decades. His studio, a renovated potato barn in Sagaponack, was formerly the studio of the painter Frank Stella. Over the course of the internship, I learned screen printing from a fellow assistant, Robert Barden, who had been Warhol's assistant for many years. I also got to see the inside of a working studio for the first time, and this experience led me to pursue the goal of becoming a working artist. Fast forward 30 years. In August of 2020, Steve Miller and I worked together to launch Techspressionism.com from the front porch of his studio in Sagaponack. As an undergrad, I studied under Angelo Ippolito, a New York School abstract expressionist painter. He opened my eyes to abstraction and encouraged me to move to New York to continue my artistic journey. When I graduated from Binghamton in 1994, I moved to New York City and established my first studio in an old bank building in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, long before this area became gentrified. Not long after moving there, I was jumped underneath the Williamsburg Bridge while coming home from a temp job, and my jaw was broken in 3 places. After this incident, I decided to move across the East River into a much smaller space in the East Village, where I lacked the room to paint. However, these circumstances prompted me to begin experimenting with my first abstract digital drawings using a Wacom tablet and Adobe Illustrator. During my time in the city, I supported my studio practice as a freelance artist and designer. My first job in New York was developing CD-ROMs at a small multimedia shop in the East Village. The owner of the shop came in one day and said, "Hey, there's a new way to distribute multimedia globally. It's called the World Wide Web. We've got to get in on it." So being the youngest guy in the shop, I was tasked with learning how to hand code HTML. These are 2 early sites I designed and coded in the mid-90s, which were the launch websites for popular science and golf magazines. In the evenings, I used the same tools to create my first explorations into abstract digital art. This piece, entitled Urbanite, is a digital drawing of mine from 1999. It's an early example from my Metagraph series of vector-based digital drawings created between 1999 and 2004. Unlike bitmap formats like JPEG images, vector-based graphics record information mathematically in code rather than in a grid of pixels. A vector-based format allows the images to be resolution independent, which means they can be scaled to any size with no pixelation. Vector-based graphics also lend themselves well to animation, and this piece became the basis for my first audiovisual NFT over 20 years later. Urbanite was originally drawn as a still composition in Adobe Illustrator using a Wacom tablet and a Power Mac 8600 in 1999. It was reborn on the blockchain as an audiovisual NFT 22 years later using Adobe Animate. The original audio track includes recordings I made while living downtown in the East Village. In 2005, I had a breakthrough moment when I ran a painted surface through my inkjet printer for the first time. I removed some of the rollers and paper guides to allow the work to pass beneath the print heads unscathed. This is an early work on paper from my wireframe series entitled Portals. Later in 2005, I enrolled in the MFA Computer Art program at Bowling Green State University in Ohio, which is where I met Patrick Lichty, one of Techspressionism's co-founders. Over the course of my NMFA studies, I had my first solo gallery exhibition entitled Wireframes at the Hudson Gallery in Sylvania, Ohio. My wireframe series has become the basis of an ongoing body of work, including this 2020 painting on linen entitled Invictus, which is currently on exhibit at Southampton Arts Center. In this video, you can see the various stages of this work in which digitally composed elements are printed directly onto the painted surface using a large format inkjet printer. Multiple layers of print and paint combine to form the finished composition. The 2005 painting shown on the left, entitled Pollock's Studio, was my first painting accepted into a public collection. The work incorporates photos I took of Jackson Pollock's studio and backyard in Springs, New York. The original photos that I took while visiting are shown on the right. This piece from my Photo Construct series is one of the earliest works on my earliest works on canvas, combining digital printmaking and painting. It was accepted into the permanent public collection of the Pollock-Krasner House and Study Center in 2005. My maternal grandmother, Kimiye Ibisu, was an accomplished practitioner and teacher of Japanese Shodo calligraphy. She studied and taught Shodo in both Japan and Honolulu, where she was born. Here she is trying out my graphics tablet in 2006. My mother, Kikuye, is with her on the image on the right. My mother would tell me a story about how my grandma Kimiye would make the same character over and over, crumpling it up each time until it was the way she wanted. This story made a big impression on me. I related her approach in some way to the gestural mark making of the abstract expressionist painters of the 1950s. Shortly after a visit with my grandmother, I began experimenting with sumi ink painting in my own work. This is a 2013 work on paper from my Shodo series. It incorporates sumi brushwork with 3D rendered forms printed directly onto the hand-painted surface. I have a favorite story about the abstract expressionist painter Franz Klein, who's best known for his large black and white abstract paintings. When Klein was stuck, not knowing what to paint, he borrowed a projector from his friend Willem de Kooning. Klein had made some tiny charcoal drawings of furniture and enlarged them on the wall, abstracting them with the projector so only a small portion of the sketch was visible. This process became the basis for Klein's famous black and white paintings, which at first glance appear to have been painted in a fit of inspiration. These 30 by 22-inch wireframe drawings were composed digitally and then executed by hand and pencil. They were inspired in part by this story of Klein and de Kooning, in which technology was present but played a backstage role. As time went on, I continued to experiment with materials. This 2012 painting, entitled Paravirtual Orbit, was one of the first pieces of mine combining inkjet and oil painting. In 2013, the day before my wife Donna and I were married, I got a call from a gentleman named Charles Bergman, who is then the current chairman of the Pollock-Krasner Foundation. He informed me that I had been awarded one of the foundation's artist grants. It was a huge honor to receive this grant and an amazing wedding present from Jackson Pollock and his wife Lee Krasner, who established the foundation after her husband's death in 1956. I used a portion of the grant funding to purchase this large format printer, which I'm still using in my studio today. This photo was taken when we lived in Orient Village on Long Island's North Fork. So now that you have some background on what my work is all about, let's get into the topic of Techspressionism and how it originated. I coined the term Techspressionism in 2011 as the title of a solo exhibition at 4 North Main Gallery in Southampton, New York, in the space currently occupied by Fine Art. The catalog essay for this show was written by tonight's host, Helen Harrison, and was the first usage of the term Techspressionism in print. Helen is the current director of the Pollock-Krasner House and Study Center in Springs, New York, which is the former home and studio of artists Jackson Pollock and Lee Krasner. She's also the former curator of the Parish Art Museum as well as Guildhall Museum on the East End of Long Island, and a longtime art critic for the New York Times. Ms. Harrison is currently serving as Techspressionism Senior Advisor and was instrumental in helping to define the term, notably stressing the importance of defining Techspressionism as an approach versus a style. In 2014, I wrote the first draft of the Techspressionist Manifesto, inspired by artistic manifestos of the past, including André Breton's Surrealist Manifesto and Marinetti's Futurist Manifesto. There are 10 points in the manifesto, but I feel that the first 3 are the most central. The first point is that the computer and technology in general are not separate from humankind, but are a natural extension of us. The second point is that technology is a continuum which is as old as humanity, not a novelty or fad. The third point states that the computer is one of a long string of tools which has enabled human expression, including the typewriter, the camera, the printing press, the pen, the pencil, and paint. The manifesto has since undergone revisions by collaborating artists Patrick Lichty and Renata Januszewska, both of whom are included in the show in Southampton. Techspressionism was first referred to as a movement in Wired in 2014. This article, entitled If Picasso Had a MacBook Pro, was published in conjunction with a solo exhibition at Glen Horowitz in East Hampton, curated by Scott Bludorn. The Techspressionist Manifesto was exhibited as part of this exhibition and was also included in the printed catalog. The term Techspressionism was first given exposure on television through a PBS interview recorded during an artist residency at the studios of Key West in 2015. As part of this residency, I installed a solo exhibition entitled Techspressionism Works on Paper. The exhibition was featured in the interview, which first aired on the PBS Miami show Art Loft. It was later syndicated to other PBS stations across the United States. In the summer of 2020, I did a Google News search for Techspressionism and saw that an artist named Oz Van Rosen, based in Southampton, had independently used the term to describe her work in several articles online. I reached out to her to discuss the possibility of formulating a Techspressionist artist group. Shortly thereafter, I reached out to Steve Miller and we developed the initial language and strategy for Techspressionism.com, which launched from the front porch of his Sagaponax studio on August 22nd, 2020. I then presented the idea to Helen Harrison, who agreed to serve in an advisory role to the project. Helen suggested organizing an exhibition as a framework for the development of an artist group, and so we set up an online meetup to discuss next steps. On September 1st, 2020, the first Techspressionist virtual salon was conducted via Zoom. The meetup was comprised of Helen Harrison, Oz Van Rosen, and myself, as well as Steve Miller and my colleague from BGSU, Patrick Lichty, who was teaching in Abu Dhabi at the time. At this meeting, we established the current definition of Techspressionism and the goal of bringing it into common usage as a term of art historical nomenclature. Our salons have become a core component in Techspressionism's development into a movement. These meetups were conceived of as a modern counterpart to the surrealist salons of the 1920s, in which artists could meet informally to socialize and discuss ideas. This screenshot from salon number 2 is my earliest photographic documentation of our salons. Artist Devonte Bradley, visible in the lower left, also known as Davo, proposed the idea of recording our salons and publishing them to a YouTube channel, which we began doing with salon number 8 on January 5th, 2021. Next Wednesday, on May 25th, we'll be conducting our 44th salon, East End Tech. It'll be moderated by Steve Miller and will feature artists in the current exhibition at Southampton Arts Center who are local to the East End of Long Island. We currently conduct our salons every other Wednesday at 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time, and they're open to the public. You're welcome to register to attend at techspressionism.com/salon. There's also an archive of past salons available for viewing at that URL. Techspressionism's growth model, starting with myself and Van Rosen, is based on the idea of self-identification. You are a Techspressionist when you say you are. This is in contrast to many other movements of the past in which the movement itself was defined by critics and the artist participants were also named by external participants. In the light of this, we decided to initiate the use of the hashtag Techspressionism on Instagram to identify artists and to propagate the term, with the aim of bringing it into common usage. This also allows artists to identify themselves as Techspressionists. This past weekend, we hit 40,000 posts using the hashtag Techspressionism on Instagram since our first salon meetup in September of 2020. In October of 2020, the Techspressionist Visual Artist Index was established on Techspressionism.com. The index is a curated selection of artists primarily discovered through their use of the hashtag on Instagram. Over the past 20 months, our online artist index has grown from the 4 artists in our initial meetup to over 280 artists from 40 different countries. If you're an artist and are interested in consideration for inclusion in the index, please add the hashtag Techspressionism when posting your work on social media to be visible to our curators. Techspressionism's current Instagram curator is Canadian artist Renata Januszewska, whose piece The Imperial Air was selected by Southampton Arts Centre as key art for the current exhibition's postcards, posters, and banners. Our current Twitter curator is her fellow Canadian artist, Jan Swinburne, and Skojo is heading up our Pinterest presence. When the Techspressionism YouTube channel launched in January 2021, it also became the platform for an ongoing series of artist interviews initiated by artist Roz Diamond. The interview series is largely artists interviewing other artists in a conversational format, inspired in part by Warhol's Interview magazine. There have been a number of Techspressionism group exhibitions leading up to the current show at Southampton Arts Centre. The first was Techspressionism Collab number 1, which opened as an online exhibition in April 2021. This project, initiated by Davo, was inspired by the idea of notable collaborations such as the one between Warhol and Basquiat. We partnered with the German technology firm Kunstmatrix, which provided the virtual exhibition platform for this and future online exhibitions. The collab concept involves 2 artists passing a digital file back and forth to result in a collaborative piece. There have been 2 collab shows thus far, and a third is in the process of being organized. On May 5th, 2021, NFT Now, curated by artist Ann Spalter, opened on Techspressionism.com as one of the very first curated exhibitions of NFTs online. Ms. Spalter taught the first digital art classes at Brown University and RISD and helped formulate the initial text describing Techspressionism as a movement on our website. Her NFT artwork was recently featured in the New York Times, fetching a personal record in an NFT auction she helped curate at Sotheby's. The online show, NFT Now, was selected as a Frieze Week editor's pick in ArtNet News by senior editor Sarah Cascone, and has been archived for viewing at techspressionism.com/NFTnow. Our first major survey exhibition, Techspressionism 2021, opened online in October 2021 and is archived for viewing at techspressionism.com/TS2021. The initial call for entry received over 1,200 artwork submissions. The show, curated by Patrick Lichty and myself, spanned a diverse field of artists from 26 nations around the world. Techspressionism Brooklyn was a one-night pop-up show curated by Giovanna Sun, aka Dubwoman, at the Williamsburg Hotel. The show, which opened on December 16, 2021, marked the first physical group exhibition of Techspressionist artworks and featured works from 26 artists selected from the Techspressionist Visual Artist Index. In the 1970s, the German artist Joseph Beuys created the term social sculpture to embody his understanding of art's potential to transform society. As a work of art, a social sculpture involves human activity that strives to structure and shape society or the environment. The central idea of a social sculptor is an artist who creates structures in society using language, thoughts, actions, and objects. I was first introduced to the concept of social sculpture by Joseph Neckvetal, an American artist currently based in Paris and a participating artist in Techspressionism, Digital and Beyond. The concept of social sculpture has become an important model in my consideration of the purpose and direction of Techspressionism's present and future development. From my own personal standpoint, some of the transformative goals of the exhibition and Techspressionism at large include the following: to present innovative work in a broad range of styles, reflecting the expressive potential of electronic media, to demonstrate that artists have always adopted contemporary technologies for creative purposes, and to embrace curatorial inclusivity in terms of gender equality and international focus and sociocultural diversity. In closing, I'd like to share a few behind-the-scenes shots of my own from the exhibition's installation, as well as a selection of documentary images of the finished installation I just received from Jeff Heatley, photographer and publisher of Art and Architecture Quarterly East End. Jeff's images, as well as an essay from Helen Harrison, will formulate the basis of an upcoming book documenting the exhibition, Techspressionism, Digital and Beyond. This last shot of the artist was taken by my daughter Aya at the opening reception at Southampton Arts Center on April 23rd. Over 300 people were in attendance, and of those, over 30 of the participating artists were present from as far away as Australia. Techspressionism Digital and Beyond presents innovative work in a broad range of styles, reflecting the expressive potential of electronic media. The exhibition includes the works of more than 90 artists working with technology from over 20 countries around the world, including Afghanistan, Australia, Belgium, Brazil, Canada, Canary Islands, Czech Republic, France, Germany, Hong Kong, India, Iran, Italy, Netherlands, Peru, Puerto Rico, Russia, Taiwan, Turkey, Uganda, Ukraine, and the United States. I hope that you have the opportunity to visit this exhibition, which will be on show at Southampton Arts Center through July 23rd, 2022. If you're unable to attend in person, you can experience a 3D virtual tour of the show at techspressionism.com. Looking to the future, I've been cultivating a new initiative called Techspressionist Nodes. Techspressionist nodes, which are localized groups of artists organized by country. This approach allows for a decentralized model of growth in which artists in various countries can network together independently to develop international exhibitions and other programming. The first node, Techspressionism.ir, was established in October 2021 by Iranian artists Nagin Etisabian and Sahar Musavi in collaboration with Patrick Lichty, serving an advisory role. Since the opening of Techspressionism Digital and Beyond, 4 additional international nodes have been established by founding artists in France, Germany, Canada, and Brazil. I hope this presentation has given you a sense of just what the heck Techspressionism is, an understanding of its past, present, and its future. I'd like to open up this conversation for questions, but first I have a question for our moderator, Helen, and that is, what is it that originally interested you about this idea of Techspressionism?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, Colin, because as a conventional artist myself, I actually studied sculpture, printmaking, and did graduate work at Hornsey College of Art and the Brooklyn Museum, and then went back to school to study art history. For me, it's technology and art really, the two things didn't necessarily come together. And then when you think about it, of course, all art is created in some technological way. As you point out, even a pencil or a pen is a technological tool that enables you to express visually some concept or some idea that you want to get across. So thinking about the computer or other digital formats really doesn't seem like that much of a stretch. And when you explained to me that you were trying to use technology in a subjective way, that this was not graphic design, that this was not some kind of commercial or illustrative purpose, but that it really had to do with expressing subjective internal feelings using this new tool, that was what intrigued me.
Thank you. Well, I really, I feel that your support and interest in the idea from an early point was really what allowed me to believe that it was something worth pursuing. That is, you definitely have a lot of credibility, in terms of just your knowledge of the subject matter of expressionism at large, and I'm sure can see what we're doing here in a larger context, which I find to be extremely valuable information.
Well, I think it's important for everyone who's working in the area of new technology to keep an open mind about what its potential actually is. In fact, I see Patrick in the chat has mentioned that in the Renaissance, oil painting was a radically new technology. And the idea that you could put oil paint into a metal tube and take it out of the studio and work outdoors with it, that was also a radical technology at the time. It enabled a certain way of expressing yourself that you simply couldn't do otherwise. You would write there in front of the motif instead of having to make sketches and take them back into the studio to develop them. So what interested me also was the fact that through digital media, you can disseminate your work in its original form, not as a reproduction, but as a born digital work of art around the world in a way that simply cannot be done with other forms of art. And this is really radically new. So from my point of view, I'm very curious to know how you how you actually put this show together, because I know it was a real challenge when you have people from all over the world who are contributing.
Yeah, well, the online survey exhibition, Techspressionism 2021, was sort of almost like an initial curatorial round, in the sense that Patrick and I looked through a ton of work, and it was sort of a combination between the work that came in through the open call, artists that the two of us knew personally through our own past histories, and largely participants in the salons who really, to me, formulate the core of the online community aspect of Techspressionism. So it's kind of an interesting mix in that, a lot of the international artists have been involved through their use of the hashtag and through their propagation of the hashtag on social media, but maybe not so much on the salons because of a language barrier. Whereas a lot of the people on the salons, are meet up and have familiarity with each other's work and kind of all know each other, but are primarily English speakers. So I thought it was interesting, the idea of nodes to try to connect the artists within the larger group, within their own countries. And that sort of started with the Iranian node, and they just kind of did that on their own. And then once the show opened up, I actually started an Instagram chat between all of the French artists in the exhibition, and just to introduce them to each other. And they started talking in French and developing, they created their own Techspressionism France logo and have been talking about organizing, an exhibition over there. So I think it's really, and they're all communicating in French, which I'm not fluent in, so I have no idea what they're talking about, but I'm extremely excited and
They can open
supportive
their own
of it.
direction.
Exactly, and I think it would be amazing if there were French speaking salons and salons that opened up in a variety of different languages. And I think that's what really, interests me about the idea of developing something that's really like not necessarily based on a pre-existing structure. That is, I feel like a lot of movements in the past Like when we look at abstract expressionism, most of the ideology, or a lot of it, seems to really have been capitulated by critics like Greenberg and Rosenberg, who were sort of external from the artists themselves. And a lot of times, in movements in the past too, it really hasn't been based on the idea of self-identification. It's been sort of outside writers and critics sort of saying, well, these are the pop artists, or so I think the idea that something could be based on self-identification, it's almost something that only really could have existed through the mechanism of the internet and social media.
Well, also through your open-minded approach. Now, Patrick has a comment.
Oh, let's see here. It's that one thing that when Colin first started talking to me about this, one thing I kind of got, and I've never told him actually about this particular anecdote. One thing I think that in so much, whatever you want to call it, post-internet, new media, in other words, like, all these different genres that relate to technology and art. One thing I think that's missing a lot is that there's a lot of times in which we have the art critical, the analytical, and the idea of saying that. And I'm not saying that this is wrong, but what happens is that historically speaking, we have work that speaks as much from the heart as from the head. And the thing is, in the contemporary, a lot of things is based around so much about the discursive. But the one thing that I wanted to share was that I was at the Getty actually for the opening of The Passions, Bill Viola, and he was being interviewed by Peter Sellers, and what a great conversation. There were let's see here, bunch of Los Angeles friends. But anyways, the one thing that he was talking about how this was inspired by his time in a, in a monastery. But, he went back to this notion, and this is where I get this notion of the radicality of oil paint. And at that time, when The Passions came out, he was dealing with high def, not 4K, but, he was dealing with high def video. And the thing that he said, the color palette, compared to, old NTSC, which is, an acronym people would say never the same color, is the, it's the idea of saying that, guess what? This is digital color. This has a color range of this, this range. It has this contrast, ability for contrast that we haven't seen before. He said, so when it comes to video art, him being a video artist, as a lot of us are media and what Dick Higgins would call intermediate artists, he's saying that this is like new oil paints. So the thing is that, and that being the passions, in other words, we could probably co-opt that as a Techspressionist piece. But if you get what I'm going on a bit as I do, but what happens is that I think really, what happens is that Techspressionism kind of fills a hole in the kind of discursive space of technology and art. That is around the passions. And the thing is that, so, and in a way, I think that's one thing that's really significant about this particular exhibition and how it resonates with so many people, as Colin was, talking so well, about, boys and his, as many artists, are looking to positively, impact the world, through the notion of people getting together around art. So anyway, thanks so much for letting me go on so long, and I'll shut up anyway. Thanks.
Well, the sense that there is a community that crosses boundaries, that crosses borders, that has something in common, regardless of language, that you don't even need to have words to communicate this, that you can do it through images and through sharing images in its own medium, in its own framework, I think is very inspiring. And obviously, the fact that we have so many artists here and so many artists around the world who have sort of tapped into this shows that it has a resonance for people. Well, but the ambitiousness of putting together a physical show I mean, obviously you can do many things online that you can't do in physical space, but here you see a photo of Colin standing with these images that were sent to him and then as digital files and then printed on aluminum panels. And I don't know, Colin, how many different countries do these come from?
Yes, I just wanted to bring this up because I never actually answered your original question of how did I, put this together. And, this concept of, I sort of nicknamed it the global grid, even though that's sort of a corny way to talk about it. But, it was a central vision of mine when I was sort of imagining this show, was that there could be a grid of fabricated pieces in which artists from all different countries could submit high resolution compositions specifically to be fabricated into this grid. So in this grid here, there are 15 artists from 14 different countries. So starting from the top left, we have Brazil, Afghanistan, Russia, India, and then France. And then in the second row, there's the UK. I'm blocking one of the artists from the Netherlands, Canary Islands, and then two artists from Germany. And in the bottom row, we have an Iranian artist. There's an artist from Puerto Rico also behind me, Lucy from Czech Republic, and then Meltdown Love from Ukraine, and then Alessio Sana from Italy. So there's 14 different countries represented. And what I did to create this grid was I created a web form in which the work was uploaded, and then each of the artists actually signed their digital signature in the form. And on the back of these pieces, I created labels where they're titled numbered 1 of 1 because they're digital monoprints, and it has their digital signature on it. So, I thought it was an interesting way of, allowing there to be an international component of the show within sort of a finite budget that I had to work with.
Well, and then they also had to agree to have them printed, to have them set up in a physical format rather than projected or put on a screen or in some other way. I mean, you've transformed them in the sense that they're now actual objects, but the artists were fine with that. They agreed to it. So that was another step in the process.
Absolutely. And there were definitely, I mean, this was really the first physical group exhibition that I've curated, and it was definitely a ton of work and sort of like a real eye-opening experience as far as the logistics involved. I have a whole new respect for people who are actual curators such as yourself day in and day out. Although I remember asking you one time, you must be dealing with all this sort of stuff. You must have had years of experience dealing with all these sort of issues with artists, and they're coming up with concerns or whatever. And you said, well, many of the artists in the shows I curated are dead, so I didn't have to worry so much about their
the easiest
issues.
kind to deal with, but well, especially at the Pollock House. But I have a longer curatorial history dealing with live ones. But you managed to pull it off, and I really have to give you a lot of credit. Now I see that Michael has his hand up, so you've unmuted. Good.
Okay, thanks, Helen and Colin. I guess one of the things that I've come to appreciate now, having been a regular salon member and part of the group since very early on, is I think one of the unique things about this group, and Helen, I'd love to hear your take on this historically, is that a good number of the older folks in our group have been doing technology-based artwork for quite a long time. And I think we were like little islands in this big sea of diffuse ideas of what computer art, all these other vernaculars that have been used over time. And for me, I'd be curious to see how that is different than previous art movements, and like where do we go from here, I guess. And I think the pandemic definitely was kind of this coalescing factor. But I've been so impressed by how many of the artists, in one way or another, have had 20, 25, 30 longer years being involved in technology to help create art. And so I'm just kind of curious as to historically how you see that as maybe a unique feature, because we didn't know about each other, I think, for a very long time.
Well, I think that probably the unifying factor, or the thing that comes to mind when you think about artists struggling to have the creative value of their medium recognized, is photography. That's the obvious analogy, because even at photography's in very beginnings in the 1840s, there were certain practitioners who were using it for what were considered to be creative means, that these were not simply recording images, but they were manipulating and finding pictorialism, as it was known, was really an artistic movement. But because photography was so widely used just to record things and for commercial purposes and for documentary purposes, that tended to obscure the artistic and creative elements. They always existed, and there were always people out there doing it, but it wasn't taken seriously. And also partly because it was a replicatable medium, that by definition, photographs were duplicates of other things. And I think those two things have both had an impact on the way digital art is perceived. So those two obstacles to overcome, yeah, they are being overcome. Obviously, an exhibition, things that Colin and the whole group are doing are bringing this to public consciousness and letting people decide for themselves whether they think it's art or not. And as Colin said, you know, if the artist says it's art, it's art. Sort of a Duchampian concept. But you know, if it was good enough for Marcel Duchamp, it's certainly good enough for me. And actually, Colin brought up another interesting point, that in previous movements, very often it's the critics and the curators and the collectors who decide the canon, who in fact, Elaine de Kooning once said, once they got involved, that, you know, that was the end. As long as the artists themselves were defining it and establishing it, she was happy with it. But then it kind of went out into the world and other people took it over in philosophical terms anyway. But now this is an artist-defined movement. And I think that the brilliance of it is that it's worldwide, that it's happening simultaneously. It didn't spread the way abstract expressionism spread. It happened all over the world, all at the same time, and everyone just kind of came together around this rubric, which is sort of the opposite way that art movements usually spread. So in historical terms, I think it's unique.
Interesting. I appreciate your perspective.
I mean, one inspiration for the sort of strategy was there's a scientist by the name of Richard Dawkins who developed this term called memetics, which is actually, you know, where the idea of the meme comes from. So before, the meme was a funny picture on the internet of a cat with some headline. It was actually a scientific theory based on the genetic model of the way that genes propagate. But it was the sort of ideological corollary of that in the sort of pursuit of an explanation of how ideas propagate. And Dawkins wrote this book called The Selfish Gene, in which he coined this term, the meme. I think that might have been back in the 70s. So I got really interested in this actually when I was in grad school. And so when we started talking about, you know, developing this into a movement, I thought, well, you know, the sort of petri dish of social media is like the perfect place to kind of percolate this meme, and really the hashtag is really how this thing spread, you know, which I thought was really interesting. And you know, I'm very, very happy that it's been picked up by people who are not native English speakers. You know, and one other thing that I wanted to mention that I think is really important is, you know, like how Patrick had noted that it sort of fills a gap. Like when I was a grad student at BGSU, the name of the major that I had and that Patrick also had was computer art, and the undergraduate version of it had been renamed digital art. But the majority of the digital art undergrads really could care less about anything to do with art that would hang in the gallery. You know, at least at that time, digital art to them meant it was a career track to make Pixar movies, to make the next Grand Theft Auto. That was what digital art was synonymous with in the academic realm at the time. I mean, I believe it's changed to some degree since then, but you know, I remember.
Like us.
Yeah, well, I
Not
mean,
if
I
you want to make a
remember,
living.
like
I
during
mean,
our first
those are
salon.
practical
Yeah, no,
considerations.
that's definitely true, and I think it's important because I mean, the commercial world is where I learned all of the skills with the software that I took into the studio with me. But like I remember at the first salon, there were two things that kind of like came up when we were working on the definition. Oz Van Rosen said, "Well, let's try to, you know, determine what Techspressionism isn't." You know, and I said, well, it definitely isn't Pixar movies and video games. You know, it's the things about digital art that aren't personal fine art, you know, and I think that it fills a niche there. And then Helen, you had really stressed the importance of I remember the original definition was it was a direct mashup of the Oxford English definitions of technology and expressionism. So it was an artistic style in which you know, technology could be used as a means to express emotional experience. And you said, well, I think, you know, we should take out that word style and replace it with the word approach. And you know, that to me, in retrospect, was a pretty important and major decision, in the fact that there are other artistic sort of genres out there right now. Ones I can think of off the top of my head would be glitch and vaporwave, where those are both artistic styles in which technology is utilized to create artwork, right? You know, but they're recognizable styles, that is, and they could be accomplished by downloading an app, a glitch art app,
Mhm.
and pressing a button. You know what I mean? So
Well,
the idea
in
of it
other
being an
words, that
approach.
imposes something on the image that you're making that is a recognizable template that then you would function within that template.
Yeah, and it also ends up creating a body of work that, although it might be by a bunch of different artists, all can tend to look very similar, you know. And I think that that's actually one thing that also is interesting about Techspressionism is it's so diverse in terms of, you know, the inclusion of both abstract and figurative work in, you know, a variety of different sort of styles.
We even have
Almost, you know,
sculpture. You have
yeah.
three-dimensional sculpture.
Absolutely. You know, and that is, I think, different from a lot of the other movements of the past as well, you know, in the sense that
Are
it's
there
not
any other
linked.
questions, or I don't see any other comments in the chat? Wait a minute. Oh, an interesting point. Patrick says I was in Chicago. I was a Chicago glitcher at its birth in 2010. So glitch had a hold on him. Also, that were the caves of Lascaux in French. No, of course not. They were inhuman. And this is the beauty of that kind of communication, where people, I think that was one of the appeals of abstract expressionism, actually, that my friend Alfonso Osorio called it the international language of the brush, because it spoke to people across cultures. You didn't need a dictionary or a language to interpret it. You could take your own interpretation to it. So it's one of the reasons that it became as such an internationally accepted way of expressing one's feelings, because your own feelings as a viewer could be interpreted, it could be interpolated into it. But with what you've done, Colin, I just can't say it enough. I'm so impressed with the way that people have responded to this impulse that you and Oz and a few others kind of expressed in the beginning, and then were able to disseminate on an international level. It's really been, I'm sure, very rewarding for you, although I'm sure at times you wondered whether or not you really should have gotten involved in it. But I see here Cynthia DiDonato has a comment. She says, Techspressionism opens the door to working in traditional art and working in a hybrid fashion by moving in and out of technology. Now that's something that Anne was talking about 2 weeks ago when she showed us how she was using digital imagery and then manipulating it and then turning it into pastel, oil pastel paintings. Partly, I think, from what she said, because people didn't take the digital art seriously, that when it was handmade, it was acceptable, but if it was printed on a computer, it was not. And here we go back to the problem of technology as a limitation rather than something that enables you. It actually holds you back just because of the prejudice of people who don't accept it as a legitimate art form.
And, I can identify with that, but also the lack of a good way to describe work like that, like the paintings behind me, they're, like Invictus, they're acrylic and inkjet on linen. So I would really have a difficult time calling them digital art. To me, they're much more paintings.
Right.
In the past, other artists have incorporated printmaking into their paintings, such as Rauschenberg and Warhol, and they were still referred to as paintings, not silkscreen art,
Well, that's
So I
where
think,
Warhol got in trouble.
sure, but ultimately, this sort of consensus was now they're paintings, for better or worse, which
If
I think
Leo
is
Caselli
interesting.
says it's a painting, it's a painting.
Right.
But I see here a very sweet comment from, wait a minute, let me just pull it down here, from Holly Gordon. She says, and this is a real compliment to you, Colin, in years to come, this exhibit will be compared to the Armory Show of 1913.
Wow. Well,
I agree.
you'd hope.
I agree. Well, we are coming to the end of our time, and I'm just really delighted that you could all be with us. I hope that in 2 weeks' time, you will come back for our third and final talk in this series of Art in Focus on Techspressionism. And it will be by Shimon Ati, who is the Bergman Visiting Professor of Studio Art at Stony Brook University. And he will be responding to Techspressionism. So I hope to see you all then. And thank you again for being with us tonight.
Thank
Bye-bye,
you, Helen.
everyone.
Thanks so much.